The breaking news that's emerging right now, the Washington Post only moments ago reporting that prosecutors in New York have convened a grand jury to decide whether former President Donald Trump should be indicted as part of their investigation into his business. Let's get straight to CNN's Paula Reed. Paula, so what do we know about this? This sounds so potentially significant.
It is significant, Wolf. It suggests that this investigation, which has been going on for 2 years, is entering its final stage. Now, prosecutors have been looking at whether the Trump organization lied about its assets to defraud insurance companies and banks by saying they had more than they actually did, and also whether they may have lied to the government saying they had fewer assets so they could pay lower taxes. Now, former President Trump isn't the only one who could potentially be in legal jeopardy here. Investigators have been looking at other executives and the company itself. Now, according to the Post, this grand jury will meet about 3 times a week for 6 months. And it appears that this matter is not the only matter before this particular grand jury.
You know, it's significant, Paula, that we're watching all of this unfold because it also comes as Trump's lawyers responded today to a lawsuit about his role in the January 6th insurrection here in Washington. What was his defense?
That's right, Wolf. And this is the first time that the former president has formally responded in court since the insurrection. Here he was responding to a lawsuit by Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell trying to hold the former president responsible for the insurrection. Now, in his arguments, he makes 2 specific arguments to defend himself and his message that he issued to supporters on January 6th, encouraging them to oppose Congress's efforts to certify the results. His first argument is the First Amendment, to saying, look, this is constitutionally protected speech. Now, there are, of course, limits to the First Amendment. You cannot incite an insurrection, but that's his first argument. His second one is a little more specific, and there he argues absolute immunity because he says he was arguing in his official or advocating in his official capacity as president. Now, during the Trump administration, he was frequently testing the limits of executive power. A judge in a similar lawsuit has dismissed this kind of defense. As to whether the judge will buy it here, we'll see, Wolf.
We certainly will. All right, Paula, thank you very much. Paula Reed reporting. Let's discuss with CNN legal and national security analyst Carrie Cordero. Carrie, thanks for joining us. So what is a grand jury being convened in New York right now? Tell us about the progress of this investigation into the former president of the United States.
Well, as Paula just described, I think it does certainly represent a significant new step in the Manhattan DA's investigation. And with respect to their investigation, we know that it probably doesn't just involve the president. Their investigation pertains to conduct that took place by the Trump organization pre-presidency. So pertains to financial crimes, as Paula described, and other matters that had to do with the Trump organization itself. So it could implicate the former president, but it also could implicate individuals who are part of that company, were part of the leadership and management of the company, as well as the entity itself.
Given the fact that this grand jury is now convened, how soon potentially could we know whether or not the former president would face charges?
Well, the prosecutors aren't going to bring a case unless the grand jury returns indictments. And at this stage, I think it's too soon for us to know what type of information they are presenting. From the Washington Post report that just came out, it sounds like the grand jury is just being impaneled. It's a 6-month grand jury that's going to cover other matters as well. So I don't think we should expect anything imminent. I will say this information about the grand jury, as well as information more recently that came from the New York Attorney General regarding her criminal investigation, it does sound like drips and drabs are coming out of this investigation. And really, normally what we would expect from prosecutors is that the time that we hear from them is when they have a charging document.
The former president, as you know, Carrie, also facing some other legal issues. He's defending his role in the January 6th insurrection, for example. In response to that lawsuit, we just heard from Paula, the former president claims his fiery speech from that day is protected under the First Amendment, and he had, in his words, he had absolute immunity as president to contest the election. What do you think of that argument?
I think the absolute immunity argument is probably the weaker of the two arguments. So First Amendment, there is a high bar to demonstrate that somebody has caused imminent violence or, the riot that took place after his speech. The absolute immunity, I think, is weaker, number one, because that is a very, very broad assertion of presidential authority. And there are usually more specific types of presidential authority that are asserted. So executive privilege, or sometimes a president will assert attorney-client privilege. Absolute immunity is extraordinarily broad, as well as the fact that when the president was speaking on January 6th, he really was speaking as a candidate. He was speaking as someone who was challenging the election as candidate Trump. It really wasn't a presidential action that he was engaged in. He was president at the time, but for those reasons, I think that that particular argument is the weaker one.
Legally speaking, Carrie, is there such a thing as absolute immunity for the president?
It is not something that is a recognized immunity. It's something that the Trump organization has argued. They argued it in his impeachment as well. But as I mentioned, usually presidential immunities are asserted regarding a specific thing. In other words, regarding testimony, regarding conversations with advisors, regarding conversations with legal advisors. It usually pertains, or official presidential actions. It's usually not something that is asserted as just a broad, the president can do anything.
All right, we'll stay on top of this story. Obviously, potentially so significant. Carrie Cordero, appreciate it very much.